true American podcast style, but we speak a different language. If you've never been on a beach, I was on the beach in Egypt one time. I was like to my ex, fucking stay at her. Know that, I wasn't as enlightened as I am now, but I was like, look at it, and she was like, you can't say that, people. And I was like, they're Russian, like they don't know what we're saying. Like they haven't get, even when you go down to England, you can get away with being like, see if you were to just go down there and fucking blah 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 blah. Yeah. People are just like, what did you just say there? Yeah. I think that it's a weird one. See, when I think most English
people do it for a bam up though.
That's what I was going to say. See, when I worked in England, it's like when you're speaking normally to people, they tend to go, I don't know what you're saying, but then if you were to go, I think you're a fucking dickhead, they'd be like straight away.
I know exactly what you're saying.
I know what you've said.
That's like Billy Connolly, like the word fuck off, everyone understands it, no matter where you're at. If you just scream it, people will know. But yeah, I think when we were in Harris, that happened when, so we ended up hiking with two other hikers, and one of them was from London, and we were walking, and lots of locals just talk to you. It feels like you're just going back to what Scotland probably used to be like. And when
so this was like the Hebridean Way or something you were doing recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, sorry, just to go straight into that, but yeah,
that was the first question anyway, just to sort of kick off by chatting about.
But accents were a big thing up there because all the islanders still speak. Really, they speak Scottish, but some of them are all Gaelic, but their accents are slower.
Yeah, I think they sound
really
Welsh.
Slow like that.
They say curry and stuff like that. They don't, and
I mean, my knowledge of Gaelic goes as far as like Donny Murdo, so I'm lost.
But I Donny Murdo. What was Donny Murdo?
Danger Mouse.
Danger Mouse. Aye, Danger Mouse and Gaelic. Do you remember the guy that had the, what was it? Janish. The guy had the clappy, had the hat, that had the.
Right.
I do, but I think that's probably like our generation, maybe.
Yeah, and that's a shame though that Gaelic isn't a big thing anymore. And we talked to a couple of locals about that, and hearing it is getting kind of filtered down into the Highlands in some schools, and I think it makes
We've got the Gaelic school here just right there. The Gaelic school in Glasgow is just at the other side of that building on Cleveland Street. So, but it's the only school in Glasgow. It's like our sort of native tongue, and we're in Scotland, and we're in the biggest city in the country, and we've got one school, and that's to cover probably a geographic space that's like nearly 2 million people. Right. So you're probably talking like 60 people a year can go and learn how to speak. And it's a beautiful, beautiful language.
Yeah.
I had an ex that was from Lewis, and her auntie is Christine Primrose, who's like basically like the Aretha Franklin of sort of traditional Scottish music.
All right.
She's done duets with like Van Morrison, and she goes to like America every year and hang me. But you're right. It's like the heritage of it sadly seems to be sort of gone dying some.
You feel so much more connected with Scotland when you can speak. I think just by imagining what I would feel like if I spoke Gaelic. I think because visiting all the islands has made me feel really connected with Scotland much more than I used to feel. Kind of growing up where I grew up, I didn't see that side of Scotland. I grew up in Livingston, which is, my mum moved there from the overspill of Glasgow, and then I grew up there as well. And it's just grey, masonettes, dark, cloudy. Everyone thinks Scotland's shit. And I first went to Arran. Some of my family are from Arran, and I couldn't believe it was part of Scotland. And then I moved to Orkney, and yeah, I think I've just had a real connection with Ireland.
So did you live in Orkney?
Yeah.
Right. What was it like living up there? Because going for Livingston, even though, I doubt that you would have anybody to be like, Livingston's a cosmopolitan,
I mean, we passed through Livingston on the way to Weekend Away recently, and I swear to God, I thought the entire place was just one big, massive industrial estate.
But really going for that, which is kind of like you're saying, like a satellite town that's got like a huge designer outlet and some factories, to like Orkney, it must have been a bit of a shock. Is Orkney the one where you need to get a license to bring on another vehicle? They like limit the amount of cars that you're allowed. It's one of Orkney or Shetland.
All right.
Yeah.
Where if you want to take your own car, they're like, no, we're at capacity, and unless somebody takes a car off, you can't get one on, unless it's for like, putting in broadband or like that type of thing.
Yeah.
But what was it like
limited.
going from Livingston to stay in Orkney?
There's a bit of like a step in between. So like when I first left school, I left with like no qualifications and kind of didn't know what I wanted to do, and then found youth work and community education, and realised I could go back to study, and loads of motivations for that, but mainly to change mine and my mum's life. I didn't want to live in Livingston anymore. I didn't want to feel, it's just like, it's almost like a dark cloud when you live in that area, or that's how I felt. So then I went to college and I studied in HNC, and then I got into uni, which was mind-blowing. I went to Edinburgh Uni, but halfway through the community course, I kind of decided that I wanted to go into more facilitating community work, and the uni course was kind of leading you towards kind of ideology and politics. And although that's a big part and you need to be equipped, it was making me feel less connected to the people I wanted to work with in a way. It was like accents, coming back to accents. I was losing my accent. I was losing the language I used to use. I sound completely different to when I first started college, and it wasn't a conscious thing, but it's just kind of developed over time where I've lost it. So then I swapped to do a sports studies degree in Stirling, and when I was doing Edinburgh, I actually lived with my mum still, so I grew up just me and my mum, and then when
You're
I went
commuting for like Livingston through Edinburgh for uni.
yeah, and then I was also doing lots of community work on side of that. So work with refugees, adult education, youth work, homework clubs, anything I could build experience up and confidence in, and kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Because I think that's a constant journey, figuring out what you want to do. And I know I always want to connect with people. That's my main thing, and I've just kind of evolved that in different things over time. So after Edinburgh, I went to Stirling and actually moved to Stirling. And that was a massive change. Your environment is so huge to how you feel and what you think you're capable of. I think when I grew up in Livingston, and I always felt a bit alien and a bit different. I've always been really dweeby, and I really connect like things, and I've thought differently. And I think the only time I really was able to express that was with my mum. She's really amazing and tells stories, and was able to help me in school when I didn't know how to learn. I would come home and she would teach me things and be able to make me understand things in a different way. So I moved to Stirling, and I think that Stirling, just seeing what people live like in another area where it's calm, everyone's not on edge, not everyone's stressed and trying to pay bills, and every day their mind is absorbed with just trying to get by. You go to Stirling and it's just peaceful, there's mountains, there's like water, you're at university. It was just my first introduction into that way of life, and I always felt like it was out of reach in a way when I grew up.
Aye. So do you feel like Livingston's very detached from nature? Is it a nature thing?
It's probably a class thing. There's certain aspects or pockets, like we've talked about and you've talked about in the podcast before. There's pockets of affluence where it's probably closer to green spaces, but where I grew up it was just masonettes and council estates, and there was like small tiny woodland and stuff, but nothing to make you feel like when you're in Stirling and you're near just where I live in my flat, feels like I'm in nature in a way. Although there's houses all around, just it feels different in a way. Like coming to Glasgow, you feel connected with people in Glasgow differently than I feel when I'm in Edinburgh connected to people. It's just like, I think different places have different feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like there's a part of it that I really relate to, and it's like kind of sort of rejecting the place where, you don't like being. Like, I didn't like being in the scheme, and I think that as soon as possible, it's, I think there's no mistake that I live in the West End. But part of what's happened to me recently is that I've kind of sort of squared the circle of a lot of my mental health issues. I've started to like reconnect. I've started to like find myself being pulled back, where it's like I start wearing skip hats. Like up until like 6 months ago, it wasn't normal that I wore skip hats. And it's been a wee bit of a deliberate thing where I've I loved that when I was a teenager, and I've rejected it in my 20s. So I'm going to go back.
Yeah.
And I feel like actually I want to go back to calm time more and see my mum more now, as I've sort of like settled this idea of, like you're talking about, like that environment and different environments. I'm more able to go back and sort of see it for what it is, and feel more comfortable in that environment. Is that something that you're getting yourself? Like, do you feel yourself getting drawn back to Livingston?
Yeah, and I think it's once you know the difference. I think when I was like 17 and 18, I didn't know what life could be like out with where I grew up. We didn't travel a lot growing up, and we'd wild camp and stuff, but I just didn't have the kind of understanding of what life could be like out with that area. But I definitely feel connected to that way of life and the people that are in the community that I worked in, and my mum, and there's so much good that can't be dismissed growing up in those communities, because but you learn so much. Like I think that there was no way I would change how I grew up, even though there was really challenging times that I wish my mum didn't experience. I think that when I look back at my childhood, there's nothing I would change, but I just wish my mum didn't have to go through so much stress. But coming back to what you asked, I think I still always will feel connected to that way of life, and I'd never want to change anything because I'm out it. I think that if I didn't get the opportunity to go to university or move and go to Orkney and see what other parts of Scotland look like and just experience different things, I might have resentment over growing up in that area because I realise a lot of the people that I grew up with didn't have the same opportunities. And there's so many different factors to why that is. And there was loads of barriers that kind of came up when I was
But you were
trying to
one
go
of
to
them.
uni.
You left school with any qualifications, like you said.
Nothing.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I went to college, and then it was always my mum though that supported me. I feel like that when you have someone that understands the struggle and understands that, like, she always just pushed me to the things that made me happy, and working with people, thankfully, was one of those things. But yeah, I think that the people that I know that still live in those environments that couldn't move out and couldn't see the difference, like you said, you've moved and then you love coming back, they resent that and they feel the anger and the frustration when they can, because most of the time it's just getting by and they've not even got the headspace to think about that. But when they think about politics or the way of life and what they've grew up in, they start feeling angry because they feel like they can't get movement away from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's more being stuck than actually or being trapped in that environment. I think it's really interesting that you've managed to get to uni. Like, I think there's a lot of people that leave school without qualifications and that's it. You know, it's like what would it, you know, like even teachers in school sort of like perpetuate that, you know, if you don't pass your exams, your life's done. Like, what are you doing? Don't fuck this up. And you're like 15.
Horrible pressure. My daughter's just finished up with it. Got her great exam results. We're really happy with the wee bitch beat me at English. I was fucking raging.
That's great.
I know, man. I was like, fucking bitch. No, I'm proud of her, honestly. But it's a lot of pressure to put on young kids at that age to be like pure, decide the path of the rest of your life at 15. You know, like, maybe no.
You were saying that
Like
like your mum, but how did you sort of personally cope with that, or did you even have that idea in your head that
No,
you know, school, what have I done here?
School wasn't important to me, and I'm like a different version of myself now than I was back then. A lot of people, if they seen me now who knew me then, would be like, wow, because I was like kind of not part of the young team, but part of that young team culture where we'd go out drinking all the time. School was not important. All of our lunch money, if we got lunch money, was saved up for drink. It was just such a different culture and what was important. And if you thought about schoolwork, you were a dweeb, which I was secretly that with my mum. She would explain loads of cool things to me and they always stuck with me. I think everything started to make sense when I got diagnosed with dyslexia in uni. So I did my first ever exam at uni, and I'll never forget this teacher. She said on the exam paper, come see me after we did the exam. And I went to see her and I was like, I wonder what's wrong. She was like, have you ever been tested for dyslexia? And I was like, oh no, I haven't. And I looked at my exam and I didn't even realize I did this, but I have so many ideas sometimes, like so many. And sometimes I especially in time pressured conditions, I would like half write a sentence and then move on to the next one in case I would forget the next idea. But that is I didn't know that was a clear indication of dyslexia, because you've got so many different ideas that are coming together, and anxiety with time pressure. So I would always just half finish sentences just in case so I ended up going to get tested, and actually probably one of the most traumatic experiences ever, because it's like an hour and a half exam, and it might be different across the board, but mine was an hour and a half exam with a psychologist who it's basically an hour and a half of just getting everything wrong. And it's you get a sense of failure when you come out. I just felt so deflated. I was like in first year at uni, I was thinking I can't even do uni because all of the tests he's given me, and then they do a summary basically saying like, he said, I don't know how Jen's managed to get this far, because this was my second university experience. I'd already been to Edinburgh Uni for a year and no one had picked it up, but that was because it was just essays. So this was my first exam since school. So yeah, after dyslexia, I started getting support, and then not only support, because I don't think the support really helped me, it was just understanding that I thought differently. And I could write, I need to work out how I can formulate my ideas in a different way. So I think getting to uni was the challenge, but actually figuring out how I learn and so I've really had to do a wee bit more maybe than some students, like be up all night doing extra notes and doing certain things just to understand how I learn. It's been a strange journey.
I think it's crazy that you were that far into your sort of educational career and it had never been spotted, especially in this day and age. It seems like something that we're supposed to have like a better handle on than, you know, obviously what you've experienced. Like, I think that's crazy that somebody could get as far as you know, through, as you say, an
Yeah.
HNC at an actual, you know, Edinburgh uni. You know what I mean? Like,
I was quite a disengaged student though in school, like in
Right.
high school. I was just so disengaged. So that it probably, because it was an exam, and do you know what has really helped? I wouldn't change it in any way, but it's helped me in so many ways, but especially working with young people. I used to work at a homework club, and I remember working with this wee boy, and he was always disengaged. One of those classic boys that we hear about that's like just not doing anything in class and gets like left outside and that kind of thing. And no one wanted to work with him. And I love working with him. I love chatting with him, and lots of young people like that I just connect with. Just because you just talk to them about things that they really enjoy. But this young person hated reading, and he couldn't understand why you would need to, I think I've talked about this on the podcast, he couldn't understand why you would need to read. And I remember just working through, and I realised he had dyslexia just with the way he was talking to me, and then he got a test in school and he got some extra support. But I think we even maybe have talked about that in the podcast that I did with you, because I remember thinking about it, just because so many young people don't get the opportunity to, because they get kind of labelled as a problem child
aye.
For sure.
with all the other things that they probably have going on out with school.
It's almost an excuse to write folk off because dealing with whatever's actually the issue is just too difficult or time consuming or whatever it is. And it's something that we see across many walks of life, isn't it?
Well, aye, absolutely. I mean, there's a few that are screaming out, and I think like things like dyslexia are definitely one of them. And I think I think that I'm sure we're more further forward than what when you were
Oh,
diagnosed. I mean, how
definitely.
long's that been?
Yeah, years, like 10.
So in a
years.
decade. Hopefully, we're further forward. But
sure.
I think I echo what was just said there. To think that there's been young people over decades that could have been supported in learning how to learn differently
That's
and
it.
not think that they're stupid. Like it was just like you're saying, people, bad boys, you know, bad get them out of the class, they're trouble. And it's more, well, they might be troubled, but I don't know if painting them as trouble and giving them these labels is thick and stupid when in fact they've got like dyslexia and all you need to do is just make a small adjustment to how they learn and they can flourish. That's sad to me, but do you think that underlying condition sort of held you back at school, made you disconnect into that sort of drinking? And if you're just thinking what's the point in me doing, you know, like
You internalize it, you think it's you. I think that's the biggest like pattern that I see in my own life and other people that have experienced all sorts of things, is you internalize it as you're the problem and you can't learn and it's you. And I think that maybe it was the people I was around that maybe encouraged me to do the certain things that I did, and I enjoyed it, and also didn't think school was for me. Like I wasn't academic enough. I had that mindset, that pattern or that thought running through my mind. I actually just didn't find things that I really enjoyed learning. And I would go home to my mum. I remember the first time she taught me about evolution, and she explained it in such an amazing way, why all our bodies adapt and how skin adapts and eyes adapt because of the environment. And I found it fascinating. And I remember just like then after that, just asking her loads of questions about lots of different things. But when I didn't understand something at school after that, I would come home and ask her about it. And she just has loads of random facts about things in her mind. So I think having her to bounce off, coming back to your question, probably a mixture of that and just feeling like, yeah, I was the problem. Like it was me. And school makes you feel like that if you don't learn in the same way. And you're probably right, it's changed dramatically since then. But I think the subjects still need to change.
Yeah.
Because I've met loads of young people now in my job that don't do well in school but have so many amazing interests and flourish in music and that's the biggest, I think, conversation in all of this, creative types, sensitive creative types that maybe don't fall into the normal structure of school, and they're quite sensitive and compassionate and empathetic types. Often it comes with art. If you've got like everyone's creative, but if you're tapping into that regularly, you're often quite a sensitive person. And I don't think that the school structure when I was younger fit quite well into that and supported young people that were going through that.
I mean, I think when we were getting ready to leave school like a million years ago, the chat felt like it was about sort of vocational education, like back to the old school days of like apprenticeships and stuff like that. And it seemed to make more sense to me at the time, although I was academically, you know, all right in that respect. Like, it was something that always made sense to me because I've seen so many mates that I grew up with and, you know, went to primary schools with and all the rest of it. We were just, you know, sitting in history class and they're sitting, you know, stabbing their hands with a pencil to keep them, you know, their mind occupied and that type of carry on. Like, but I don't know that that's ever went that way, because I think like your scenario, for example, like had somebody been able to get to you at a secondary school age and actually maybe explain some of the vocational stuff that you are now involved in, or how to access them, maybe a bit more and a bit less on the academic side, maybe you'd have got, where you were going if, a wee bit sooner, you know what I mean? Like, or felt like those options were there for you, because I think that's what we all want when it comes to like an education, is to have options, you know what I mean? Like, and so many folk, like you say, come out of the educational process and don't see them, and you're like, so we now need to actually start talking their language, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that conversation was happening when we were getting ready to leave school, but I don't know personally that it's progressed an awful lot, you know what I mean, in the time since.
And it definitely comes back to the people blaming themselves and feeling guilt and shame around who they are as an individual, rather than feeling supported and that they can do not anything that they want to do, because sometimes there are restrictions and barriers, but more
Because I want to be an astronaut, but let's be
Right.
real, you know what I mean?
right.
Maybe I could become a billionaire.
But there's
Don't know
like,
which one's less realistic. You know what I mean? Like,
probably both.
Aye.
I would say
there.
probably becoming a billionaire. Let's be
Aye,
honest.
aye.
I think, like, if you were to look at it statistically, the chances of anybody in Glasgow becoming a billionaire is probably less than anybody. Even like my granny, who's been dead for 30 years, becoming an astronaut, she's probably got a better chance of that. But I remember a school teacher. He said something really to me in 6th year that was like, I remember like really stressing about higher maths exam in 6th year. And he just took me aside and he was like, this means nothing. What? He was like, I went back and get my master's in mathematics when I was 50. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. And he was like, see this? He was like, fucking. It was like the greatest gift of my worst enemy, because then I started to be like, I can just fuck about. Like, this doesn't actually,
matter.
but he was right. He was so right. He was like, you're stressing about this maths exam, mate. Like, what you do, you're going to uni anyway. You've got an unconditional offer. Like, you're just, whatever this is, just let it go. And actually, even if you go to uni and you fuck up, you can go back later. I did that. And, you would think that this guy would be giving you the usual sort of stick to your exams, go to uni, find your trade or find your way, and this is how you'll do it. But he was actually...
But then he's found that way to speak to you in your own language, just exactly what we're talking about, and has actually made, a difference to your approach on it, you know what I mean?
Just took me about a decade to...
As much as he's also now
I realise it
fucking
fully.
scumbag.
Aye, absolutely. But it took me about 10 years to actually come to be like, that guy was so right, you know what I mean? Like, even when I was in my late 20s, early 30s and thinking about going back to uni, I was like, oh God, like, what am I going to be like? That meme with Steve Buscemi and the skateboard, like turning up to uni, pure alright kids, like hanging about, trying to use buzzwords with them. But I think that's just self-defeating. And I think a lot of that sort of culture that existed, even, I don't even think it's just school, because I think it's even just parents. You're talking about like the creative process. I've mentioned this podcast so many times that when I said to my parents I wanted to be a musician, they were like, you sure you don't want to go and pursue management in McDonald's? Because I was working at McDonald's at the time. And I'm like, if uni's no for you, that's fine. But you should,
start on the ground floor somewhere.
Aye, and I can remember being so deflated by that, just thinking, is that what I've got? Is that the choices? I've got uni that I hate, McDonald's that I hate, or, you can do that part-time, but you shouldn't don't put your eggs in. And, it was almost like really... That's fucking shit, you know what I mean? Surely encouraging creativity, I think that's... But I think we live in a world, unfortunately, where the arts are kind of undervalued.
Underappreciated, for sure. And it's so crazy to me, because there's so much to gain from appreciating people that are creative and art itself and the journey. And I think that if we can tap into it more for mental health recovery, I'm really for that. Just getting people in all sorts of ways, because people that are not creative, because I think everyone's creative, but a lot of people say I'm not creative. It's a bit like when you say to someone you run, they're like, oh, I'm not a runner. It's the instant response, because we relate things to our lives. But creative is something that a lot of people either do or don't do it in their own mind, although everyone can do it. But I think that creativity across the board, and I think conversations are creative. I think writing your ideas down are creative, drawing, all different ways of having an outlet to share your ideas. That's it. Having an outlet to share how you feel and tapping into flow state, which is not always possible, but if you can try and do certain things, I think that it's so good for our mental health. I think having an outlet with someone or by yourself that allows you to tap into creativity is so healing and cathartic. It's not the answer, and it won't transform mental health but recovery, but it'll really help support it.
Like, even in just the base sense of like conditioning your brain to think another way, it's productive in that respect. You know, because if you're in, and as I have been recently, you know, in a sort of really bad spell of mental health, like, your brain forms really negative patterns, and I think when you take that moment to think creatively, or, you know, paint, draw, write music, whatever the fuck it is, that it takes that pattern and it shakes it up. You know what I mean? Like, and it's good for, at least if you use it for nothing else, for interrupting that negative pattern. I think to be honest with you, like, we should give ourselves permission more often.
And write how you feel in the moment, truthfully, is really hard to do. Like, I've become writing as a creative outlet, because that's something that I try and do a lot more of, especially when I lived in Orkney. That's when I really started to journal. Because the reason I moved to Orkney was after my first period of depression, which I was not used to experiencing as low as I did feel. I grew up with mental health in my family, and I also often thought because I was aware of it, I could almost resist it. And then, which is not true, but you convince yourself that could be the truth.
Absolutely do.
It's
I
like
think
denial.
It's true short term. Like, you can resist against it on a very, very short term basis. And if somebody's got like a huge project, for instance, or they've got like a uni courser in the last year and they find themselves in the sort of pits of depression, maybe even resisting against it for a short period of time might be the right thing to do, not fully engage it when you've got this big, massive body of work to do. But you're right, like, you can only go so far. Like, I use a bucket and say to them, like, you're filling your bucket, and there's manageable levels, but see, as soon as you hit that top of that bucket, like, that's it. Like, you need to let some out, and how are we going to let it out? And actually trying to teach people how to journal is like the bane of my life, because I'm a highly creative person, so I naturally can just let it just pour out, and actually getting people to engage with that and getting them saying, like, just write, just let your mind go. Don't judge the words, don't judge the feelings, just let it flow out of you. And it's really funny that you talk about, like, so the type of therapy that I'm currently doing, when I go to train, I do training on Zoom, unfortunately, because I don't stay in California, but like for 2 hours a week.
One day, dude.
What's that?
One day.
And I don't even know if I'd like to. I don't even think I'd like to stay there. But the biggest thing that I get back, and we're all therapists, so I'm speaking in a Zoom call with like between 10 and 20 other therapists who have all got way more experience than I have. And the biggest thing that I'm always talking about is that therapy is a creative process, and I can't tell you, you can't get a way of, if they say this, you say this. That's not how it works.
Aye.
It's being
It's
in the moment.
There's no like answer response to it.
It's being in the moment and navigating that, and that's the same as writing music. If you were to go, if I go from A to here, it will say, yeah, great. That's how all the shit throwaway pop music's written, with these formulaic, do this, then this, then this. But actually,
all you've actually got is problem solving. You've got to think round corners.
Yeah, all the great stuff comes from this flow state that you're talking about, and this sort of natural. And sometimes the things that don't normally work is the thing that works in the specific circumstance. And the guy that I study with says the biggest barrier that he gets with therapists is getting them to hear the music of therapy. And he talks about how it's like writing a song, but with another person giving you the lyrics, and you're then putting the music to it. And it's a really interesting concept, because it's always, when I get to that point, what do I say?
Right.
And he's always like, I don't know. I can't tell you what to say. You need to let go of that part of you that's trying to say, find out the right thing to say in this moment. And he talks about how you need to let your ego die. And
that's it, and be natural with it, and try and not judge yourself in the moment. With any creative process, if you start judging yourself or thinking too much about what you're writing, you're putting in hurdles. And I think the same with probably therapy and podcasts and all these things, is as soon as we're more aware of ourselves and who we are and what we look like and all these things that make us feel anxious, or sometimes can make us feel anxious, it stops the creative process, and that's where resistance comes. And I really like Julia Cameron's Morning Pages. She talks about, it's a writer who did The Artist's Way, and she talks about a lot of different things, but like procrastination with writing and trying to get into writing if you're coming up against resistance. If you're not, like you're saying, some of your clients have maybe not used to journaling and sharing how they feel, and they can't be fully honest with themselves, or they don't even know how to write. She says that Morning Pages, as soon as you wake up, when you're in that kind of fuzzy headspace where you don't know what's kind of going on, you still remember a wee bit of your dreams and stuff, reach over, get your pad and just write. And then that allows you, like, there's no filter or kind of expectations. You just write all the stuff that's in your mind. And I think it's really funny because when I used to do that, or when I've not done it, there'll be moments where you think you'll remember things and then they just dissipate. Like, you know, when you wake up and you're like, that was such a strange dream, I'll write that down at one point or I'll talk about it, and it just disappears. So I think it's been really cool for that, just to remember certain things. But it's a nice practice to get involved in, just to stop judging yourself and even rip them up after you've done them. It seems like such a pointless process, but actually being honest with yourself about what's going on in your mind, like when you're saying when you were going through that hard time, when I was journaling when I was in Orkney, I couldn't believe that I was carrying all this weight, this baggage in my mind. And I got one point where I was just every day writing at night. So I would be working, I walked a lot of the Orkney Islands. I walked basically all of them, and I camped on all the mini islands and did a lot of walking around there. But I always had at night where I would just write for hours, and it was weird because sometimes I'd be like, I don't even have anything to say, and I would just start and it would all come out. And I've not journaled to that extent ever again, but it was almost like I was going through a lot of healing and recovery and finding out about myself, and journaling was a really good part of. And I've never read it again either. I wouldn't want to, maybe at some point, but it was just like what I needed in the moment, and I don't even feel urged to go back to it because, like you're saying, the process was more important. Like the counselling process, it's not often what you say, it's the synergy and the energy and what happens and the full process of it all together.
Absolutely. And I think that's the part of which I'm finding a lot of success with people, is because, funnily enough, I've done sales for like 15 years, and so there was a part of me that people would always get sent up for the head offices and be like, what's this guy doing? Because I was always like a top sales guy, and really and truly what I was doing was just talking to people. I just had this natural ability to sort of just connect very quickly and build rapport, and they can tell you how to do that on paper, but you need to practice it. You 100% need to practice it. You need to get yourself out of your own head. And that's an interesting take. I think that sort of creativity and like that early morning thing, and I've got this pure insatiable obsession with being able to channel that and just be able to bring it up like that. Like reading like it's the guy that wrote Twin Peaks, David Lynch. He wrote a book called Catching the Big Fish, and it's about how do you channel creativity? How do you get out your own way? It's only your fear that will stop the flow. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. And he's about sort of wee practices to get yourself into a flow state, and sort of when you start to think, just detach yourself from your thinking and stuff like that. So I really love flow state, and I'm got this pure mission to sort of find, you know, how do we do it? How do you utilize it? Because if you can grasp that, I think you can grasp anything.
And it kind of connects with hiking. I mean, I've been really conscious of that as well, because I really love being creative, and I think that I can be my best self in those moments where I can tap into that. And I'm trying to think where I enter that space more, and it's after hiking or during hikes, like the long distance trek we just did. You enter a weird rhythm where you're just connected with nature. It's almost like your body's just so used to walking, eating and sleeping, and you're just like surrounded by nature, and you've got a big heavy bag, but you almost can't even feel it. Your feet are sore, but it's like you enter this weird headspace where all other external pressures, a bit like going back to growing up in a working class community where there's all these external pressures that prevent you being your best self. I think that in just normal worlds, we're kind of overwhelmed with technology and all these things that add layers onto who we are, and we forget who we are on the inside, and that's when the judgment starts to come. And like you're saying, that people are judging themselves when they're trying to be creative. It's all the layers. And I think when you enter nature, or really into aromatherapy, and I always use aromatherapy or music, that allows me to tap into, or exercise. Finding those moments after doing something like that or during something, it really allows me to tap into it much easier.
You ever heard Eckhart Tolle talk about that sort of connection with nature? And he's basically like, he gets this question a lot. I mean, I live in a big city and I don't get this connection with nature. And he's like, your nature.
People romanticize it.
But your nature.
At both ends of the spectrum. Like, obviously, when you're talking about that desire to go back to Carntyne, and you're talking about that desire to go from Livingston to like Orkney and then back to the Hebrides again, there's clearly like a recurring theme about, and seeing some of the pictures, I mean, it was wild. It couldn't be further removed, but I think like we all romanticize either side of it a wee bit sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, I love being out in the the country myself. I love being in the city. I don't think personally I could separate the two. Like, I think each has got their own sort of place and time that I enjoy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. His thought is that, like, well, you are nature, and if external factors are bearing down and you go within, you can just shut your eyes and you can just breathe for half an hour, and you can, and that's called grounding. And then he talks about how grounding is nature. But he had a good one where he was like, just stare at the sky. If you really want to go into nature, like, you can just look up, because that sky's, you know, like the perspective of what you're seeing, and you see the same thing. And I found that quite a comforting thing. But I there's a connection between the flow state and what he talks about as grounding. And if you find yourself being overwhelmed by your surroundings and your environment, if only we could teach people, for like a baby, to be able to shut their eyes, take 10 deep breaths and sort of connect with their inner self. Why are you feeling so overwhelmed? What's going on? And that's kind of what journaling, you know, that's what journaling's doing. You're getting this internal monologue that you might not even be aware of. I mean, when I first started journaling and I was writing stuff, I was thinking, I'm not even thinking this. And then you realise to trust the hand, because it's telling you something that you might not even be aware of. Like, I think that there's nothing more powerful than speaking. But there's even, if you're going to speak to yourself, the best way to do it is on paper, so that you can read it back.
And read it back, but also try and be as honest as you possibly can with yourself. And that's sometimes really hard to let go of the judgment and think. And coming back to the romanticized thing, I think you just take whatever is going on in your mind with you in a wee bag anywhere you go. And I've said that before, like, it doesn't matter where you're at. It could be the most, like that's what people romanticize, retiring and being on a beach and enjoying life. And it's like, well, you'll take all the shit with you. So I agree, and I would love to spend like
wipe your ass then.
Right, it's just like I would love to spend like 6 months on the islands and 6 months in the city.
Nice.
And have that combination. But I think you probably do take everything with you. And coming back to the grounding, I want to get into EDMR therapy. Have you heard a lot about?
Is that the lights?
Yeah. Eye sensitizing. So before they do any of that work, they do 6 weeks of grounding.
This is the stuff that's used to deprogram PTSD or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, all sorts of trauma. Yeah, and they're using it a lot more. They don't have it available in the NHS at the moment, but a lot of the young people I'm working with would really benefit, and I know a couple that are going through it. So I'm learning like firsthand how their experiences have been, and they do a lot of grounding, so that a lot of it is triggering, because you're having to go back into different experiences to then let go. That's what the thought is. If you go back into the experience, then you're able to let go and move on in your life. So they do a lot of grounding work to kind of plant seeds to support that, and in case triggering things do come up. So they do a lot of all sorts of grounding practices where you count to 10, you breathe, put your feet in nature, all sorts of things, so that you can support yourself, maybe out with the counselling session as well, which is hugely important, because you might open yourself up in all sorts of therapy and then go back into your normal life and not know where all this angst's coming from, but you've just opened up loads of stuff. That was my first experience of therapy. I had my first ever experience before I went to Orkney, and it was 6 weeks of talking therapy. I just felt so drained and overwhelmed, and I had nowhere to channel all of the overwhelm. I was dreaming loads of dreams, because I was like reliving a lot of things, and I didn't have anywhere to channel, or I didn't have enough understanding of what was going on either. So you were just sitting with all this stuff that you'd pushed down to not think about. And now it's here, and what do I do? And it wasn't CBT or anything that I could channel and change. It was just, now I've got all this awareness that I was potentially pushing down. So the EDMR is really interesting. I've heard loads of really cool examples. One, Jamila explained that she had slept with the light on until she was about 27 every single night. She was just really, it was just a normal thing. She would put the light on and go to sleep. And she was like 6 weeks into the EDMR and didn't notice, and woke up the next day and her light was off. And she didn't think it was working as well. Every session she would come out, she was like, this is doing nothing. And then who knows if that's connected? Maybe other things in her life are changing.
So I'm quite skeptical about things like that, because I think, one, they've never reviewed it. So there's like no scientific evidence that it's working, and how much it's placebo. And placebo's real, you know, placebo's a real thing, but things like light therapy, tapping, you do like the tapping, rhythms, music, like these things, they have a placebo effect on the body. And I think that, I don't know, I've got no experience it personally, but I've got a very skeptical head when it comes to things like lights.
But what do you think about music and chanting and stuff?
So,
That's clearly healing. And
the rhythms running, like the rhythm of running, and these things, they have things, vibrations that go through your body, and I think that the lights might even tap into that in some way. And when I say placebo, I'm not being dismissive, because drugs are placebo. You know, like some drugs don't even change the chemistry; they just have this uplifting effect, and it's because the people are expecting it and they're wishing it. And it's kind of like hypnotherapy in that sense. Hypnotherapy is deep relaxation. That's it. So it's like you get in a relaxed state, you feel comfortable with the person, you share your experiences, and I think that that's where the power is.
But yeah, definitely, and we should tap more into that. I think there's you're right, it could be placebo, but it shouldn't be discredited.
And
because
I'm using the word
people,
could deliberately there, because I don't know, but it's when people make claims about things that have never been sort of measured.
Right.
There's no scientific measurement of how does this actually impact. What is the important bit, so that you can actually get to the bottom of how, like, for me, the MDMA is way more an effect, like it feels like something more real, if you know what I mean. Like, I think that when I've looked at things like that light therapy, it sort of screams of like nonsense.
But then
Do you know what I mean?
Like, if you think where we're at in Scotland at the moment for which one is more plausible, the shit thing is it's probably EDMR, because like we're so far behind in what we think about
and what
drugs.
we're going to get to first.
You know, and also like safety and understanding of drugs in comparison to America even, or in lots of different places, what you think is a viable thing to push towards. And if you say that the connection and the relationship you have with a person is what makes the change, we should just be promoting that more anyway, because people are feeling so disconnected and alone anyway. So if that's the outlet, maybe the cost and all the shit things that are involved that prevent people accessing it is the barrier, and that shouldn't be the thing, because we all need connection.
I think we've said in the past as well, like, if it works for you, it works.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. I think that for the purposes of this conversation, it's more sort of obviously like two mental health professionals sort of going and giving their opinion on something, but it's
one
good,
mental health victim.
but it's good to have that objective thing, because I do have a tendency to be very like like very skeptical, and also about how much is selling snake oil to rich people.
Right.
What part of this? What is the actual important part? And I suppose that's my own. I've got a lot of worry about CBT bullshit and that sort of thing. But I suppose the thing that the reason that I've got confidence in what I do is because I measure it.
Yeah.
People give me percentage ratings before and after sessions, and I can go, where is their progress, and I can chart it. Whereas with things like that, and it's almost just like, well, I don't know, like, but what I do know for sure is that they've never measured it. I remember when I listened to Jamila Jamil talk about it, and I was like, fuck, wow.
That must be brilliant. But that's probably where we differ in terms of who we are, in some aspects, because I am more connected with like energy, and I believe more in psilocybin therapy. But I just think of like we're like, me and Villies had a lovely debate when we were doing the Hebridean Way. We were hiking with another guy from Ireland, and we were talking all about psychedelics and the power of healing and all these things. And I had mentioned, Villies was listening to our debate about how I'm scared that pharmaceutical companies are coming in and taking over the trials in America, because like, what happens then? Do they what is the power? Does it change the environment of what it can be? For example, like all of the other plant medicines back in the day were taken with shamans and a ritual, and the power of that in comparison, like in addition with the drug, it was like all the ritual. It's a bit like yoga, where yoga in its roots is completely different to the Western world and what it's experienced in a fitness class. And there were so many so many different traditions that were lost in the way of that.
Yeah.
And that's because it's been commercialized and changed.
We're going to get the same spiritual experience if we crack open a 20-sheeter MDMA microdose or psilocybin
That's
or
exactly
whatever
my
the
point.
stuff is, the jungle shit.
And Villies' argument was it'll get to more people faster.
Ayahuasca.
The jungle shit. Right, okay, the jungle shit.
The good shit.
As you say, 2 medical professionals, 1 layman,
But that's
all right?
it. We need it all.
absolutely.
Because all of us can benefit from plant medicine, and I don't understand why there's like there's not enough categories around drugs and understanding around drugs. A lot of people still think psilocybin is not a good thing, and mushrooms.
So
it's like
I think, you know, I've had plenty of
stigmatised.
experience of taking these things over the years, and I've took them with 2 different intentions as well. One of them is to enjoy myself or to like enhance an experience, and another one is to heal. And I think when you do the sort of shaman ritual, you've got a different intention, and it can be good and it can be bad. Like these substances, they're not all good or all bad.
No,
Weed
of
is not all
course.
good or all
No,
bad.
nothing is.
But what the difference between things like plant medicines, such as like you're talking about, like psilocybin, ayahuasca, my opinion on it and my experience is that it removes your ego. So the thing that stops you for connecting with these traumatic experiences and how people have these euphoric, uplifting experiences is because you shift your consciousness. Like one of the first times I took a big dose of mushrooms, I can remember just thinking, this is all nonsense. Why am I ever worried about anything? And when I come out the other side, I carried that with me. But like the dream that you described, over the course of years, it sort of dissipated into
It's
ether.
you're not judging yourself exactly as...
So what in these trials
Jen's
and
saying.
what I've read and is that what happens is that these drugs facilitate a state. So if somebody has a traumatic experience and you get a therapist that's like, sit down and speak to me about that experience, they start to panic. They start to get, oh my God, they get taken back in almost like a mental time warp. But when you take like MDMA or psilocybin, that part of you gets removed and you can just speak openly and honestly, and you're guided through it by...
I think in my experience with MDMA, you kind of stop talking, if I remember right.
So you tell people things that you would never ever
Right, so it's
tell
like
them
opens you
ever.
up.
So you just basically become this open book.
Mine was in
And
a
when you-
non-medicinal setting.
Yeah,
it was barfly.
So that's kind of like my view on it of like that, which is different from like sort of light and how that can. I just don't know. I suppose
I think
I'm
it's
just
something you need to be
ignorant,
ready
like,
for. So it's like,
How,
because
how does that
my
change?
previous experience of psychedelics was that I mistakenly double dunted and sat up all night watching Scrubs and then had to phone in sick the next day. And I think, you know, as much as everybody else's experiences are different, like I don't think I was ready for that type of experience when I experienced it. And it's been something that has had that sort of really negative, like, because obviously we've had the conversation before and I've been like, man, no, that is kind of like the line for me. And it's because my previous experience with the psychedelics when I wasn't like ready for that type of experience was just absolutely horrific.
So that's what I'm
You know what I
talking
mean?
about,
Like-
like
Setting.
the intention,
Aye.
the intention, and what do people get out of this? I've got somebody in mind, and I won't name him. He's took ayahuasca. He's still a knob. It
I
didn't
know who,
change
I
in
think
one
I know
bit.
who you're talking about.
Right,
Did
and
he
it's bec-
film it?
It's because it's
Yeah.
because it's to perpetuate their media career.
An ego.
Why
like
are they
you're
doing
saying
it? And
before,
yeah,
it's for other people and
so
not
they
themselves.
don't get that real
Yeah.
deep, meaningful, that people go there looking for this connection and then they find it through these shamanic experiences. And I think that there is definitely 100% stuff that we need to take for the old world, should we call it, like these shamanic experiences and things that you get in like the forest and nature. And we need to, well, we don't need to, but I think we could try and sort of combine it. And I think that's what this type of therapy is doing. But I'm with you. When you synthesize something, I think you ruin it. And I've never took ayahuasca, but I've smoked DMT. And what people describe to me as an ayahuasca experience is nothing like what I experienced on DMT, but it's a synthetic, well, it's the chemical compound made in a lab. So it's similar, but it's not the same. And I think that I'm with you. I'm worried that people are going to take psilocybin that you can grow
It changes it.
and try and turn it into like, you just take
But even
this.
NASA were talking about it the other week. NASA were talking about the efficacy of like using mushrooms as a means to produce, and you know, part of that was like what kind of level of psilocybin are we going to allow to like exist as these, you know, essentially mushroom farms are used to like travel the universe sort
And
of
you
thing.
hear
And you're
mushroom
like,
farms, you're just think that's what I was scared of. I love the idea of just like, I heard recently a podcast, and it was talking about psilocybin in Ireland, and it interviewed a couple, and this guy was just on this big field known for mushrooms, and he went over and had a wee word with them, and they were like 80. And oh, we've been coming here for years. It's how we connect with each other every single October, just there every year. That in my mind, and it's romanticized for sure, like you explained before, but I just think of mushroom farms and it changes the message and the meaning. But healing in all aspects is so important from all the things that we've experienced. And like you said before, like the setting when you take on anything new, any therapy or plant medicine or anything is so important, because there's negatives and positives to all of them, and your intention and what you go into, because we always hear other people's experience before we go in to do things, and then it sets expectations.
It's also the fact that my head was an absolute bin fire at the time.
So you're
you know
taking
what I
on
mean?
all
Like,
the stuff that you were going through, and it's just perpetuating it all.
absolutely.
I'm really interested in this as far as plant medicine's concerned, just how your intention shapes your experience with it. It's like what? Like people can smoke weed to disconnect, but I've found weed to be a very introspective drug, and actually when I smoke it, I feel everything's more. So if I'm feeling a wee bit anxious and I have a joint, I'm more anxious. If I'm feeling a wee bit depressed, I have a joint, I'm more depressed.
Yeah.
If I'm feeling happy, I'm more happy. So it's a strange one how your intent, what do you want to get for this? And I don't think there is absolutely any coincidence that these things grow in the ground. I think they were meant for us to take these things with different intentions, and we'll get different things.
I think when we spoke to Dan, you know, especially when it comes to things like THC and the cannabinoids and stuff like that, they're an intrinsic part of our biochemistry. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a coincidence that plants, as a result of evolution, have adapted to be needed by us in that respect. You know what I mean? Like, because, you know, our body requires these chemicals to actually like function properly in a lot of respects. You know what I mean? Like, not completely, obviously, but as I say, that conversation we had with Dan about the actual biochemistry, like cannabinoids and stuff, was like
there's
enlightening in a way that like just was crazy. I was like, this is already in my body, and he's like, it's already like your body needs this to process shit. Like, it's already there.
DMT in the brain,
Like,
you know, like
Right,
the pineal
exactly.
gland holds like a dose of DMT, and I think that tends to be the case quite a lot of times with any sort of natural drug that we get these sort of natural highs from, is that the actual chemistry of it is present.
I think it's ironic that two of the things that we probably need to like change were somewhat sort of puritanical notions is mental health and the understanding of things like drugs and stuff like that, and how the two of them can interact on a much more, you know, useful basis than maybe we're used to speaking about. I mean, but they're obviously both subjects that make, even now, still a lot of people really uncomfortable. So actually like pushing the two together and saying that drugs that you already have a really negative outlook on can actually have a positive effect on somebody's life is like an idea that's just going to slam with so many people that it's not even funny. But I think that's where, you know, the focus needs to be for some folk, because again, not for everybody. Like I say, I don't think microdosing and stuff like that would have been ideal for me to this point, but I get that they work for other folk. You know what I mean? Like, so the conversation needs to be about more grown up and less like drugs are bad.
And I think that like plants in general have so much more to offer us than we've even tapped into. And that's why I keep on calling it plant medicine, because drugs, it's just got a shit connotation towards
And like,
it.
how
and
much worse can you be microdosing psilocybin or DMT than, you know, getting pushed fentanyl or, you know, whatever else is out there now that, you know, legally allows you to manage pain and anxiety and all these other things that are just, you know, sort of toxic for us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
When I first was diagnosed with depression, I know that's a random segue, but it was it's towards plants. I was given antidepressants, and I remember Villius, because it was only me and Villius that knew about it. He was actually the one who encouraged me to go to the doctors. I definitely would have not gone if he didn't like pull me along. Basically, like, we're getting the bus. I just wanted to hide all the time.
I think it's always the way the first time.
Right.
Some of us are lucky enough to have somebody to push us on the bus.
I wouldn't have gone without it, for sure.
I think that there's just an unconscious fear of what's in there. Just this sort of like, you know, I've had so many clients that when I tell them about the process in the first session, you know, you're going to need to face your fears and you're going to need to journal and let this inner monologue out, as we've been talking about earlier. Sometimes I see the fear of God in their eyes, and it's this idea that this is what's been causing me all these problems, and now you're going to try and get me to sort of go into it. And so even going to the doctor is a step towards finding out and if there's something there and being prescribed a drug, and it's all just very overwhelming, I think.
Oh,
you know
I mean,
what
I was told at 19 by a university counsellor that they suspected I was bipolar. And I was like, okay, thanks for your advice. And then I spent like 6, maybe 7 years running for it. And it was until I got with Stacey and, you know, there was the wean on the horizon and stuff that I was like, right, okay, time to fucking at least try and sort this out. And went to the GP the first time again because Stacey basically fucking made me, you know what I mean? Like, and hearing the term you're depressed for the first time was like devastating. And it's only in like subsequent years like now that I can look back and like, I don't get why that was so devastating because I knew for that entire 6-7 year period that was the case, but having somebody actually sit you down and be like, right, so here's what it is like, it was like horrible.
And you know, I don't think it was about me. I think it was, what's strange is growing up with a single mum I think I've come to this conclusion, it's very similar to growing up in Scotland as a guy. And this is really, stay with me because it sounds really strange.
Okay.
But I think, and not in all ways, but this one way where you're drilled, kind of conditioned to be stoic and have strengths, inner strengths, than you might not have when you've got a full family.
Yeah.
Because my mum had to take on all of the things. Be a DIY, she made me a bike, she helped me learn, you know, like every single thing. She laid the carpets in my house, she painted the walls, she put tiles up, she was everything. And through her own struggles, but she was never able to really share that because she was in the momentum of just getting by.
Yeah.
And I think that when I first realised something wasn't wrong, I was more scared about, like, it was a sense of letting her down because she had tried so hard. So I think it was probably, I was scared to find out the answer, but I was also scared to let her down because I knew she had tried so hard to, like, support us when we were growing up that I didn't want to let her down. And I think it's connected to Scottish men because Scottish women, when they grow up as single mums, have to be strong.
So I was
They have
thinking
to
they
put on,
need to
like,
be the man and the woman, so
all
they
of
need to
it
be
in
big
one.
time.
So I felt that continually when I was growing up, and we were always a team. We would always just share everything and do everything, like financially and all these other things. So when I thought something was not quite right with me, it was almost like I felt like I let her down. And then going to the doctors would have been that confirmation that I was not okay anymore. And I was at university, I was working a night shift, I was running a lot. I was running with the university team and with a trail running team. So there were so many things that combined to that moment. It was burnout for sure that led to that. But it was almost like I was trying to do everything to support us, that message that I've had to unlearn. But that would have been a failure, I think, when I was going to the doctors that day. Yeah. But when I was prescribed the antidepressants, I was like to Villiers, can I try all the plant stuff before I take them? And if I still feel this way, I promise you I'll take them. So that was when I moved to Orkney. That was like, coming back to your question at the very start, that was where I went from Livingston to Orkney. It was, I wanted to change my environment and change how I felt. So I finished my undergrad and I tried all sorts of plant medicine, plant supplements. So I made my own supplements. I bought, like, instead of buying them from Holland and Barrett where they're like so much money, I'd buy like St. John's worts and spirulina and all the superfoods that you see that do have an effect, but maybe not to what we think they do. And I made all my own wee capsules and just like boxes of them. I looked hilarious because it's all these powders where you're mashing them in, if anyone had seen. And then I found a job in Orkney, and that's when I moved and I changed my environment and tried to figure out or unpack a lot of the stuff I was running away from. But I think it's a mixture when you're going to find out how you're doing and get that kind of, I think the doctor gives you another feeling as well because they have more respect in therapists as well. It's weird, like professionals. And it's actually my hope as becoming a therapist is to really support other people to recognise that they're their own person and that they actually don't need professionals or therapists. They need someone as a sounding board to support them in their journey, but that they are the master of their own self and no one else can really tell them how they feel. Because you said you knew 7 years before you went
exactly
what was going on in your mind.
Did you take the antidepressants? No. So I'm not anti-meds, but I am in a sense. Because, you know, I found out very recently in the last year that where the whole chemical imbalance in the brain came from and the root of that and why we prescribe these drugs, and it just doesn't do anybody any good. Like they have these short-term boosts and effects on people, but long-term they just don't work. There's no evidence for it, and there's no evidence to say that depression's caused by a lack of serotonin in the brain. It's just that has came from the pharmaceuticals because they had a drug that
message.
And they found that people, Prozac was the first big one, they found people get these uplifting effects for it, and because it boosted serotonin, they made the assumption that it's a lack of serotonin there that causes this. And when they've looked into it, they're like, oh wait, we're wrong, which is just true about pharmaceuticals. So the message that I give to clients, or whenever I'm speaking about it, is see if you need it, please take it, because it does give short-term relief. But it seems to be the combination of this short-term relief and talk therapy that brings actual change. And if you can get to the talk therapy before you need the drug, then the change will happen anyway. And that's what I say to people, because I'm not a big fan of people being like, just go and sit under a waterfall and just do some deep breathing and Wim Hof, and this is the answer. It's like, I don't know. Again, I think that you're getting a very powerful
tool, but maybe
you're developing a tool that people can use, but you're getting this very powerful placebo effect by doing these activities. And my worry is that long term, you're not going to get the relief that you want. And I definitely have experienced that myself with like health and fitness, where when I threw myself into the gym, I found this real big boost that came. Body image was improved, my diet improved, so inflammation markers, I'm surely all these things that we're talking about where we don't really understand truly the depth of the impact. But then 5 to 6 years later, I found myself being faced with the same insecurities, the same depression, the same anxiety about my future. And the gym did nothing for it after that point, because again, that sort of uplifting effect that I got for that had went into
we just spoke about it recently routine. When it comes to, I'm medicated at the minute. I have been for about 7 or 8 weeks. But again, that was very much like something that I felt was necessary. We spoke last week about obviously my sort of burgeoning journey in with a therapist and stuff like that. And I do feel like the progress has helped, like in terms of what we spoke about in the past, is I've had that very like immediate usefulness for antidepressants in the sort of dark doldrums of it, where you just had to feel something. But I've never up until this time kind of like followed it up with that step you're talking about, where you actually like speak it out and whatever else. And I do feel different this time as a result of it. But even in the last few times, I've been quite restrictive with how I've used antidepressants, because I would, and you'll know as yourself, I go like 3, maybe 4 months tops, and then I'm like, right, if I hit the 3 month mark, I'm starting to taper off, because I don't see them, like you say, like as a long term solution. Like they're prescribed on repeat ad infinitum, and it's kind of like the thing where, you know, we spoke to guys like Loki, where folk are on methadone for 20 years, and you're like, how has that helped them like escape for the hell of their addiction? All you've really done is like modify their addiction. And I think that, know that I would say you're addicted to antidepressants, but at the point where you're no longer feeling that, and you can feel it, you feel the difference that it makes in you. It's time to be like, right, here's where we now start to taper off on that and start to ramp up on my men's group or the therapy or any of these other things. But I think it is a very useful tool in the short term. But
For
I think there needs to be more focus on it, that it's a short term solution.
It saves life.
Shouldn't be. I don't think it's 18 months on whatever, what I'm asked to Talipram. I don't think that's something that 18 months from now I'm going to be getting the benefit that I'm getting for it now.
Yeah, for sure, man. Like I said there, man, it saves lives, and that's why I would never ever be like pure, I'm no troping. And you see a lot of people doing this, like, they're conning you with it, and it has a real impact on people, and I see that day to day. But again, I think that it comes back to
solution, because you'll be back where you are, like you're saying, a couple of years later with the same questions and the same issues that you've not addressed.
That happens. Like, you either need to change your ideas and your perspective on stuff, or sometimes you need to look at your life and actually change it. And I think that that's the bit that people, they're getting lost. And I feel like that's a failing of the health system. I don't think it's a failing of the individuals that work within the health system or been doctors for 20 years. No blame going to GPs. Like, they don't know how to therapy people. And actually the therapy that they've got is very restricted. There's a 9-month wait, and when people get it, they get 4 sessions of 45 minutes. It's not good enough. Like, it is not good enough. But
There's a sense of like desperation when you're in the moments of wanting change in your life that I think antidepressants becomes that call, because you feel, or I felt like I just wanted a solution, because I think I was so used to doing a lot of things, and that sense of productivity gave me a sense of feeling of achieving. And when I was in the depths of depression, I couldn't do anything. So I was like, I had so much guilt and shame around feeling like, I don't know, unproductive, because my life was so busy. And I was using busyness to prevent myself thinking about things. So that's why it was really appealing. But thankfully, or not thankfully, but I have family members that have had long-term use on antidepressants that prevented me wanting to tap into that just yet.
Right.
So I think it would have been my main point of action if I didn't have experience to know that that's not something I wanted to do straight away. But I understand the desperation when you want change in your life and you want to feel okay. It's not even to feel better, it's just to feel okay. And I think alongside that is momentum in life, and therapy or going to the gym or whatever makes you feel okay to make change and create change. And then you can come off or stop doing whatever that's allowed you that momentum. But if you don't have momentum, which the pandemic has really created in a lot of people's lives, it's broken that momentum. So it's then, how do you get back to where you used to be, which is not something we need to do. But if people want to get back to how they used to feel, if they're feeling, I guess, despair after the pandemic, how do they then create momentum in their life again when it's been broken? And that's why they reach to all sorts of things, from antidepressants to alcohol and drugs, because they just want to feel okay within themselves again.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing that again. We spoke last week about the drug deaths. We've seen this week the alcohol deaths, and obviously I've been pretty open about issues with alcohol in the past, and like that was one that I hurt to see. That in the pandemic, people have fell back on, you know, traditional habits, if we can sort of phrase it in that way, where their drinking's increased to a point where it's maybe become an issue, and then now affecting their health, and now, you know, contributing to deaths on a scale that we've not seen in Scotland in a very long time. And like, I think we need to stop talking about maybe drug deaths and stop talking about alcohol deaths and just talk about substance abuse in general in this country, because I think a unified approach to it is going to be much more effective than trying to like swat out individual files one at a time, because right now whatever we're doing isn't working. You know what I mean? Like alcohol pricing and all these other things, you know, restrictive licensing laws and when you can and can't buy alcohol. It's
a nonsense, Lynn. It's an absolute nonsense.
What education are we doing to like get people in it? You know what I mean?
Parallels. Hit the camera, but there's parallels between like there's huge parallels between everything that we've just been talking about in mental health and that idea of restriction, and if you try and ignore like these bad feelings or try and restrict them, don't think like that, get that away and reject it, what happens? They come back tenfold.
Yeah.
So if people are out there and they're going to abuse a substance, bringing up the price of it, making it taboo, making it illegal. I mean, look at the war on drugs. It's done nothing. It's done absolutely nothing.
It's made things significantly worse.
Yeah, so it's exactly like you said. We need to take a different approach, and I think that the approach has got to be, and ask your opinion on this, it's got to be education. Just stop telling people that this is bad, and this is good, and this is bad and this is good. You can have this, but you can't have that. You're basically treating adults like babies, and when you do that, they've got a wee rebel. We've all got that wee rebel in us that's just going to be like, do you know what, fuck you, I'm going to do it anyway.
Aye.
You know what I mean?
And it also increases the blame on the individual. All these things, because if you increase the price or whatever you're doing, the person's still going to have whatever they want.
Yeah.
So they then feel like it's them, and it increases the shame and the guilt, and it must be me, and I need an outlet. Because a lot of alcoholics or drug addicts or anyone that's relying on a substance or a something to cope with life, if it's overtaken their life and it's having an impact on their sense of self, their job, their family, they feel a sense of shame. They might not know how to stop the pattern, but they feel shame around it in the midst of when they can't feel numb.
It just drives the cycle.
Right.
You know
So
what I mean?
exactly, it's constant, and it always lands back onto the individual feeling like it's them. And it's consistent, and even when you look at people that are quote unquote doing really well in the world, we don't accept that they're mentally ill at the same time. Like, look at Joe Rogan. I really admire him, and I listen to all his podcasts and have done for about 8 or 9 years. Mm-hmm. He is mentally ill. The way he is able to, and not mentally ill in the way that we would classify it in terms of needing to go to hospital or anything like that.
Okay.
But all senses of, like, if we think about life on a spectrum, the sense of addiction and the extremeness within his behaviours in certain ways, David Goggins is the same way. It's like
Yeah.
the extremeness. It might not be mentally ill in how we quote unquote see it, depression or despair, and that's what we see a lot in the media right now, bipolar and anxiety. But there's a sense of unbalance within all of that. And I think like I've always tried and seek balance in my life, and I think it'll be a constant journey. And I think mental health and balance are kind of hand in hand. And if you feel
Yeah.
balanced in your mind, and that's not to say that his way of life is wrong in any way, but he'll acknowledge in himself that he's definitely got an
Yeah.
excessive way of life.
He's a 55-year-old father of two that's pumping steroids into his body. That I don't think his way of life is actually healthy, and he sees it as this pure health thing. He's got like a array of supplements that he takes every day, and I'm with you, but you're kind of like, what are you doing, mate?
There's
Why are
imbalance.
you doing that? There's a complete imbalance in his life. And he finds balance in so many other aspects of his life, and he's got such a healthy relationship to like his family, his comedy, his creativity, his podcast, his weed juice. But see, when it comes to certain things, you're like, oh man.
And just with all of those
like,
things in combination, you can't have balance because you've just described so many things.
too
that he's-
much.
So it's just when I come back to thinking about people that are dying from drug overdoses, we look at them in society as less than, but we idolize people that are billionaires. And that I shouldn't have said Joe Rogan because I really like Joe Rogan, but like billionaires and people that are taking things to extreme, and we idolize them on social media. And young people look at them and look at Kim Kardashian and people that have got so much,
Yeah.
but we're not seeing them as like there's an imbalance there.
Oh yeah.
And they don't feel great.
Hugely.
Look at Boris. He's not happy. He's not like joyful, happy person. So it just is weird
we
to me
reject
that we
these
like.
people that find that happiness because it freaks us out that we don't have it. Like when people like Ram Dass or Eckhart Tolle or any one of them come out, people are like, they're weird. They're weirdos. Like, and it's because they reflect something that we've not been able to achieve in society. So we think it is weird. And the one thing that troubles me about Goggins, right, and there's a lot of men, and it troubles me about guys like Peterson and Rogan and a certain like these sort of like new age men, like they're bullies. They're bullying themselves into submission. It's like, how long do you expect to be able to submit to that, mate? Like Goggins is get up, get out the door.
Shame. It's shame and guilt.
Shaming themselves.
Shame and
They're
guilt. Shame and
using,
guilt. Shame and
yeah,
guilt.
they're using these sort of like horrible ways of being that actually, if you get a therapist, a good therapist would help you untangle in your head and go, is that the best way to motivate yourself? Like, is there a better way to motivate yourself? And you can actually flourish within choosing fitness, not I need this.
Yeah.
Get up, get out your fucking bed, you loser, get to the gym, lift that weight's not enough, injured, oh God, I've torn my shoulder, I'm going to go to the gym anyway. The amount of times that I've heard like Joe Rogan be like, I train through injury. You're not a professional athlete. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it?
But he feels less than when he doesn't work out.
But
And that's the imbalance.
That's it. It's like
He
achievement
feels less-
addiction.
yeah.
These guys are addicted to this sense of superiority and this sense of like,
I can do it.
I can do it and
yeah,
you can't, and that makes me better than you.
Yeah.
And I've been there and I've sat and I've been like, Rogan, that is goals. Like, what does he do? He gets up at this time and blah, blah, blah. Why are we telling people to get up at 5 a.m? Why are we lauding Barack Obama sleeping 3 hours a night and aging 10 years over the course of a year? Why are we doing this? It's because it makes money. It's the most effective and efficient way to gain capital. Goggins is rich. Kardashian's rich. Kanye West is the most mentally unwell individual I've ever seen in that sort of place in the media, I think, ever. Maybe, I mean, of recent times, it's became very clear that Britney Spears, it's not that she's mentally ill, it's that she's trapped in this horrible situation. But why is she trapped there? Because it's making 20 people round about her a fuck ton of money and they will not let her go and be free. And I think guys like Goggins, Joe Rogan, like they're trapped in their own mind. They're totally like victims of their own success. And it's hard, it would be so hard for you to sit down with somebody like David Goggins and go, you need to give that up, mate, because it's actually, he's got a New York best-selling
Or
book,
even just like tone it down a bit.
multi-millionaire. Like, why would he would be like, this has got me to where I am, and look at you, because this is what they're doing. They're comparing themselves to
other
others.
people. And then all of their followers, because they've got such a big platform, all of their followers feel they're probably never going to live up to that. And then, like you're saying, they might get injured, pushing themselves to that capacity and then feeling shit about themselves. All of this, when I think about it all, it's all internalizing for people internalizing shame and guilt because you're never good enough.
I think a lot of it's actually internalizing quite a lot of toxic masculinity and seeing that the people that are the richest on the planet are all predominantly male or exist within that male culture, like the Kardashians. Like they are seen as the epitome of beauty, and it's like I feel like it's all very male orientated. You know what I mean? When you listen to the way that they speak, it very much reminds me of my dad and that sort of like get up, pull yourself up. And I think we're starting to get to a more enlightened place in society where we're going, that doesn't work. Like that's not working for the majority of people. It's working for a very small percentage. And like I've never really actually considered Joe Rogan as sort of like mentally unwell, but when you think about it, it's the extremes
and
that
it just
he goes
saddens me because we group people in society that we can see maybe have a problem with substances and think that they're less than when they have so much to give, probably a lot more than so many people, but they don't have the opportunity to give or show themselves. But then we group other people that on the outside look like they're doing really well, and you wonder who they are in their own mind. But they're probably overwhelmed, like that thing that you were saying about momentum. They're probably just continually going and going and going and going.
Like
and
Joe
not
Rogan
taking time.
schedules sex with his wife.
These sets of behaviours are fueled negatively.
Yeah, that's it. It's what's the fuel, and is it positive fuel or negative fuel? And the negative fuel will run out because you'll just get sick of it at some point. Maybe not. There'll be people that can keep it going forever, but they seem very few and far between. But I remember listening to an episode of Rogan where he was like, 3 o'clock on a Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays when I go home and have sex with my wife, and you're just like,
timing it
what
out.
are you doing? Mate, she's expected to be able to just flick that switch. That isn't what that's about.
And the expectation on her.
And it's why is he doing it? Well, he's checking a box.
Right.
And it's like, you're
it's
checking a box
productivity.
with your connection to your wife,
That's grim.
scheduling playtime with your kids and expecting them to be in the mood. And it's like, getting back to the flow state, like, you need to let these things happen. Sometimes when you control them, it's like a caged animal. It's not going to like it. And, your kids will just be like, they'll notice that routine. They'll notice that dad comes home for this place at this time and I need to be ready. And
after he's done ploughing, mummy comes and plays some PlayStation with me.
Funnily enough, in that podcast, they said that how somebody actually, I can't remember who it was with, and they were like, how do you get in the He's like, we have a couple of draws of a joint, and it just, it sort of like gets them into a sort of state of like, now we can connect. But I just found that strange, found that really, really strange.
And he's got such a big platform. I mean, when I first started listening to podcasts, it was a long time ago because I used to run with podcasts and I used to do night shift and they were great. I remember when I first discovered them, it helped me learn at uni as well, because coming back to dyslexia, I learn better when I listen to things and see things, and I read in sometimes, but I just learn in a different way. So podcasts really helped me. I would Google like sports nutritionists and listen to research and stuff. But what was dominant at that time was male podcasts as well. And I realized at one point, maybe 2 years ago, all the podcasts I listened to was guys. And not to say that that's a negative thing, but as a woman wanting to hear and celebrate women's ideas and other people's ideas, alternative to the norm, only listen to those ideas continually was not a good thing. But it's sad that is still the norm. Like if you were to, I don't even know, you probably know more than me, but what are the stats on the highest podcasts? I wonder if they're just all, like, I don't know. I know crime ones are quite popular.
The Newcastle guys, aren't they? They do millions every week.
I think it depends on what country you're talking about, but definitely in America, it's massively male dominated. And I think even in this country, if we just take Scotland as an example, football podcasts are king, right? They're all, I mean, the only woman that I know in that spectrum gets absolute dog's abuse on Twitter for being a female and having an opinion on football. But James English, he's probably like the biggest podcast in Scotland of like an individual, and then you've got like Sean, and you've got other ones in the Glasgow centric way. You've got like us, and you've got like DW, and they're all guys. And I've actually been speaking to a female too, but one who's way more down the line on forming an idea for a podcast than another. And I'm begging her, I'm like, please, like, I'm desperate to get a female voice in here. Like, I'm sick of like leaving this place stinking of guys, but it's no. It
does regularly smell like arse in here.
That's a joke. That's a joke. But the reality is that the only female centric podcast that isn't about sex, because there's loads about female ones that are about sex. I'm thinking about yours, and then I'm sort of going
Persistent Nasty. They're pretty sound.
Two Birds, One Pod.
We've got the BBC Introducing, but then that's not really a podcast, that's maybe a radio thing.
Amanda,
But
Mrs. Brain
You
Trainer.
get things like Mrs. Brain Trainer, yeah, but I think that when you go and you look at, I mean, I suppose we're spitballing, but we could actually just go and look at the top
And
100.
what I think about this,
I
that
quite
is
like the end series. I don't know if anybody's caught that. It was I can't remember the lassie's name now. She's a script writer, sort of movie producer type person. Splits her time between sort of Scotland and Sweden, I think.
Okay.
And she started a series where it was basically like all women, different women every week, and one of them starts the story in week 1, and then has no more to do with it. And then in week 2, they were doing it on Zoom or the pandemic sort of thing. I think there's a new season coming up, and it's all sort of female professional writers and producers that take a turn every week, and they kind of like progress and take this basically random story in their own direction for an episode and then pass the baton on to somebody else. And that
So
was
if you
quite
look
cool.
at the top 100, you're probably talking about 1 in every 10. And if we then take out ones that are sitting next to guys, you're probably talking about even less.
And why I thought about that was just because of like when I asked you guys how you're feeling about like the podcast, you were like, it's just normal now that you do that. And that's probably because of your experience. I definitely have nowhere near the experience as you. But I think like self-confidence is a huge thing within women to believe in themselves enough and what they have to share with the world enough to consistently do it. I mean, I've really struggled with that. And I think like because it's just me as well, and I've no one else to kind of like, you guys have each other. I wonder if that supports you both in a way.
For
to
sure,
continue
there's
to do it.
definitely a part of my mind that feels less pressure, because I know that at least half the time Matt's going to need to come up with a question. You know what I mean? And if it was just me sitting here, there would definitely be more pressure. I'd definitely feel a lot more pressure.
I think we've skill shared a lot as well, because in the very early days I just had absolutely no like skills for like cold approach or like reaching out to people that obviously you helped me a lot with, I think, in terms of how we like put interviews and stuff together. I think there's stuff that you've picked up off of me, and then we've went back and forth a lot, which has been useful. But there's also that thing that when it comes to podcasts, like the inherent confidence in middle-aged white guys is definitely a factor there. So there is, like, just as you're saying that on the other side, yeah, women maybe don't, or
They
you
don't.
That
had
confidence
a
for me
crisis of that confidence.
came like when I approached Matt and went, let's do a podcast.
I just kind of went, all right.
But Matt, it was almost like, all right, cool, let's do it. But for me, it was for watching people. I was watching people like Joe Rogan, and then noticing that these guys that were on these podcasts had their own podcasts, and so went and listened to their podcast, and then thought to myself, I can do this. Like, especially when you hear somebody where you're kind of like, they're an idiot. Like, they're talking what a load of shit they're talking about this subject, but I think it was inspired by watching other men on podcasts. And if you think back to 5 years ago, or if we go back to 2015, when I think podcasts really went on fire globally, there were very few, very, very, very few. And a lot of it was like the Happiness Lab and very like Helena Rifi, you know, like, what's Helena's
The
podcast?
podcast.
No, the mental
Sonic
health
Hug?
one.
Oh, Sonic Hug.
A Sonic Hug, like things like that are very specific. What they're talking about, like, you know, like women doctors talking about specific subjects, but were there a lot of women just getting into a
talking.
room and just talking and
Yeah,
talking about society and
talking.
stuff? No,
Yeah, and that's what I meant in that blog that I was doing, because it's so important to have voices so that people can relate to. And when I think about when I first started listening, it was like Rich Roll, all men, and I always wanted to add something to the conversation. I always had different ways of thinking, and most podcasts I listened to back then, I didn't agree with a lot of the stuff they were saying, but I enjoyed thinking and hearing and learning about certain things. So some of the podcasts I listen to, I don't agree with. Like, I definitely don't agree with what Joe Rogan says most of the time, but I find it really interesting to hear and then think about my own perspectives on different things.
Yeah, it
And
challenges you as well, doesn't it?
Definitely
It
challenges
you to take a different perspective if they're convincing and they seem rational.
Yeah.
And they don't seem, you know, like a bit, you know, like when you see like Milo Yiannopoulos on Joe Rogan and you're just like, he's just an extremist. Like, these people are very reasonable, and when they give you that different standpoint, you do question, you go like, well, why do I feel the way that I feel about this? And I think that's really important, and actually a skill that we're losing a wee bit as we just sort of curate our own sort of playlist of life and try and
you
like
also
baby
don't-
ourselves through it.
You don't need to like everything about one person. We're so much more than one thing,
Aye.
you know. And I think that when you see someone in a moment, you hear that in a clip or a tweet or whatever, and you assume that that's who they are. When we're actually like so many things in different parts of our life, different days, you might catch someone on a bad day or a bad moment. I remember my mum used to always say that when I was growing up, like, you don't know where someone's been and where they're going. And I think it's so important to try and keep that in mind when you're hearing someone on a podcast and you don't even know how they're feeling in themselves that day. They could be nervous,
Aye.
they could be panicking. And I think that coming back to like hearing more women's voices, it's so important to hear just a plethora of voices and hear normal conversations. And I think it is important to have those curated, edited podcasts, but more important to have just talks, because if you hear just edited podcasts as a woman, it makes you feel like, oh, well, I couldn't do that, so then there's no point of me, you know. And then you find that even reaching out to people, I've found hard. I've not reached out to many people at all. If I've talked to someone and they've heard about the podcast, like a couple of people have asked me, because I'm like, how do I set that up? And then I get in my own head about it, and I'm like, there's so, and I think that's
Took me
because there's
months
so
to pick
many
it up.
podcasts.
I knew it's one of the most normal things.
Right.
I like having just, I don't even know where the penny dropped. I think it was just practice all time, but I'm with you in that respect. But early doors, I was like, how the fuck do you even do this?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that's how I
Like,
feel.
What would hold you back? What would stop you from reaching out to somebody?
Yeah, I feel like probably just my own confidence within that, and also, yeah, probably I would do it if I thought about it and I thought about the person, because it's almost like I want to talk to people, anyone that I feel like I can connect with, which there's not many people I don't feel like I could connect with. There's lots of things we could all get. I don't know. What
Obviously, I
exact-
think that what I always sort of go back to in that is that it's so flattering to get asked to do it.
yeah.
That if I go into somebody's DMs and go, look, I've looked at I've been following you on socials for a while and I like your message and I've got a podcast, would you want to come on?
Yeah.
I'm always just repeating to myself, like, this is a positive thing for them. And if they ignore it,
Fair enough.
And the people
well,
have
what's the worst
asked have
that's going to
said
happen?
yeah.
They say no, you
I
know?
think in the
Exactly.
entire time we've done it, I can count probably on one hand the people that we reached out to that it didn't work out with.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's how I
Like,
was feeling. Like everyone I've asked have said yes. I couldn't believe Peter May, one of my favorite authors, said yeah.
aye.
Just said yeah, and I was like, "Are you sure?"
So,
Just like,
well, you've got the win. Like,
I think the biggest barrier to that is getting to the person. Like,
Right.
just by messaging people on social media, you don't automatically get to
Get
the
to them.
person. You might get to a social media manager, a
Right.
publicist, an agent, whatever the barrier might be. And that, I think that maybe I'm just sort of deluding myself, but that's why the few that Matt's talking about haven't worked out is
Right,
because
'cause you can
you
get
hear
to them.
nothing. You just you
Yeah.
don't go, nah, it's not for me. I don't think we've ever had anybody reply and go, this isn't for me, pal, sorry. It's
Aye.
always either I've got, so like with James Allen for Las Vegas, the first time I reached out, he went, I'm not doing anything for the next 2 years, mate. But I'll tell you, like, as soon as you see a post on my socials about us releasing music, come back. And it was like, great. And we did that and it worked out.
aye.
Or, so like the timing's not right, or that's really been it.
Yeah.
Or people, I've actually had a guy, it was a real shame, he's Wolfgang and he's in WWE now, and
Yep.
he started in ICW, and that guy lived at the end of my street, and him and his brothers used to wrestle in their back garden, and now he's like going to the WWE. Crazy.
That's crazy.
Crazy. And he come back and says, I don't like doing these things. It's no you. He's like, if you really want to go and search, like, I've never done it, or I've done one and I hated it. And
Yeah.
it's more about their sort of confidence, but
towards
it's
it.
really flattering to get asked. Anytime somebody's came to me, man, do you want to come on my podcast? I'm
Yeah.
like, fucking great. Aye,
Yeah.
thank you. So I just try and remind myself of that. And I think that being in a band for years and being the only person that was willing to take the bull by the horns and contact promoters and deal with these people and realise that it's not a big deal to get rejection and all these things has just served me well.
I think in the time that we've done it as well, there's almost somewhat too much like emphasis on guests in a lot of respects. Like, we did it more actively in the first, I would say, 18 months or so, where we're like, this week's issue in the news is, right, who can we get to address this issue? Or this week's album that everybody's talking about is this, how can we get to that person sort of thing? Whereas, like, I think as we've went on, we still have cracking guests, the day included, but I think it's been less of the focus. I think the focus is now for us about, like, who's going to come in and have like a good bit of chat about them, or who's going to come in and have something interesting to say. And if they also have like a following or a presence elsewhere, then, you know, all the better sort of thing. But I think it's no the defining factor in how we, or certainly no for me anymore.
I think that I'm with Matt, and I don't know how you feel about that. Like interviewing people and getting people in and going, "Oh, tell us your story." For me, it actually kind of feels like lazy. Like I would love to move, especially Rebel City. If I think about what the vision was at the start, was to do that. What Matt's
no, I was
talking
sitting about in the front room the new having a blether.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that's
Like,
it.
but doing what Rogan does, he doesn't get people in and spends an hour them telling him and him doing question and answer. They come in and he's pure. Every podcast they talk about COVID. Every podcast they talk about LA, homelessness. Like it's basically themes, and I think that attracts people. Whereas I think the whole let's write up 20 questions. Like for instance, I did that and I've not even looked at my laptop once. We started speaking, we've no stopped, and we're at an hour and a half. So
Are
it's, so I feel like this is what podcasting is,
Yeah.
Aye.
and I don't feel like question, but like go and watch the TV.
Yeah.
See if you want to go, like if you want to go and hear somebody just tell you what they're doing, whatever. Go to their website, go to their socials, and I think that perhaps COVID had an impact on that because my own sort of like personal opinion is that we reverted back to something that was manageable when we were on Zoom, and having this type of free-formed conversation, people interrupting and stuff, you can't do that on Zoom. It's so hard.
No.
So having that sort of structure, and I love question answer podcasts as well, but
Aye.
it's just more about, I think for me is about like what do I want to do? You know, what do I want to do with this? And that doesn't necessarily mean that other people need to conform to that idea. That's just me about my own
And
wishes.
what you're going to get
you know what
enjoyment out of.
Aye,
And I think that
absolutely.
that's definitely what my podcast is like. I don't really have questions, and I think that like I have certain themes, like I have a wee list of themes. But I think if I was to focus too much on the questions, I wouldn't be present with the person. I'd be like, and I would get in my own head. I think that when we talk about flow, I would have disrupted flow if I have a list of questions. I usually just think about the person and what I've chatted to them about before, of what I've heard about them, and then think about what we could connect on and just talk. And then it usually just happens, you know. Like
So what I enjoyed about being on your podcast was that when I listened to it back after the fact, I was like, I don't think like there was a single question in that, and it was just
Yeah.
we were talking and we were just sort of bouncing off each other. And afterwards, I was like, I didn't even notice that there was like almost no questioning happening. It was just that we were reacting to what each other was saying. It was nice, you know what
I
I mean?
think my
Like,
worry with that is just watching somebody joke, because we've had so many where, well, not that many, but we've definitely had a few
we've had a couple.
where you need the questions.
Yeah.
You bounce an
and
idea out and it just,
absolutely. And I think I would
they're
know
in
how
their own
to
head,
change that. Like I think
you know.
I think I would be able to navigate it into something else. I completely agree. Some people really like structure. And Villies is definitely like that. He's a structure Q&A kind of person. Anytime we've done the podcast together, he's like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, oh, well, a couple of themes. He's like, no, but like, so he's like needs a list.
Yeah.
So definitely,
Yeah.
and that'll probably be dependent on what you like to listen to as well. If someone listened to my podcast and it had no structure and they enjoy structure, then they probably wouldn't enjoy it because it's all free flowing.
So actually, the structure that
chaotic.
we started out with very early was something that I kind of broke with before like days and like years ago in like TV and radio and stuff like that. And like it was, I think one of the times when I was like, I'll write up this week's interview, and then realise I've wrote almost exactly the same interview like fucking 19 times now. Like we need to do something else, or we need to look at this another way. So I think, 'cause I felt like I got to the point where it was like, hey Jen, nice to meet you. How are you? Introduce yourself, blah blah blah. No, tell everybody your sob story. You know what I mean? Like, and it got a bit stale and sort of repetitive for me in that respect.
I edit so many people's podcasts, and you know, I might even edit this out. In fact, none of them fucking listen to it, so it doesn't really matter. But the amount of people that are like going to write the questions for me, and it breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart, because I'm going, why are you doing it?
Yeah.
You want to be the Justin Bieber? Although he writes his own fucking songs.
Right.
But do you want to be like the Little Mix of the podcasting world?
There's a disconnection there.
Yes, and
entirely
it's
with the
what
work.
are you wanting, and it's I see when I'm editing it and I hear somebody ask my questions, I die a wee bit inside. I genuinely do. I'm like,
Totally.
oh mate, like I can hear the disingenuousness in it all, and
And you can sense that from a podcast. Like, I think that's maybe why I'm drawn to Joel, because there's definitely things I disagree with, but he's genuine.
Yeah.
And I connect with genuine people for some reason. And it's not to say that if you don't have questions, you've not organised and went like done
No,
work.
absolutely not. What
You know,
your
you're
your
just-
intention again comes into it, doesn't it?
I like what you just said there, and I've definitely went more towards that. Pick up 4 themes. You can talk for 10, 15 minutes on a theme, for fuck's sake. Have some themes in the back burner that you know that the person's interested in, and then just let it happen and see what happens. I think I'll start to have a wee bit more of that and not set up the backup plan. Because see, at the end of the day, you can just delete a podcast if it's kind of shit and the person doesn't give you much. But
and redo it. There's always time to redo it. If you like, I always say that if you feel uncomfortable or you don't feel the energy today, we can redo it. And I can't take the credit. It was Billy Connolly who said that. So in his book, one of his older books, and it really helped me with everything in life. He would say that he would never write jokes down. He would write wee themes.
Yeah.
So as soon as he stepped on stage, he would have like little slipper, umbrella, just like, and then he would just riff off of the words. And that week I had my first presentation in my master's, and I was like, presentations were my worst thing all the time. But I decided to just do what he did, and I put bullet points. It was the best presentation I've ever done, because some of our minds work differently, and my mind works like that. Like, I don't need too much structure. I just need like the freedom to talk about whatever. And I think that seeing that and reading it from Billy Connolly, it just gave me that confidence to do it. And that's how I kind of set up the podcast. Always just have wee themes and trust yourself that you'll know. And you'll know it'll hit. If it doesn't hit, you're like, okay, let's move on to another
what
thing.
does it matter? You know,
It doesn't,
500 folk
yeah.
listening to your podcast. It's like, what does it
It's
matter?
the enjoyment
you know what I mean?
you do it. Like, I think that's the reason I've continued doing it, because the feeling of connection that I get with the people that I do it with makes so much of a difference. Like, I would do it and not publish it, because when do we ever get concentrated time, uninterrupted time with someone? Like, the podcast is the excuse to connect with each other. So like, even with Villiers, some of the conversations we've had, I was like, I'm so glad we did that, even if no one listens. It's just
Me and
so
Sharon have
important.
got 2 episodes of podcast that we never put out.
And it's just the connection that you
And it
had
was-
together.
I mean, I sat and edited them and was sitting laughing like all the way through them, and was like, why did we not put this out? It's almost like the time goes, like they were done last year during lockdown, and you're just kind of like, you know, the time goes. So couldn't put them out now?
Cheating
but-
on me with his own fucking bird, the fucking cunt.
I know. What more like. But there was no script to that.
Right,
you know,
you
there
just
was
go
a
with
couple of ideas. You know what I mean? There was a couple of themes, and we just went with it. And I think that you're right. That's the best podcasting, and it's making me sort of like. I think as we've come out of lockdown, I you know, never speak for Matt, but I've definitely get caught in this sort of like, right, now we prep. Get into the room, you know, and you just get through the motions.
Yeah.
And I think this conversation's been a real good sort of like reset.
Oh no, definitely. I think we had it when we had Scott in, you know, the first one in the new environment and stuff like that, where it felt we sparked a couple of cans and it just felt like a natural conversation. I much prefer it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's much more relaxed. And you take away that moment. You know, if you're just in an interview, and last thing, but with the Peter May conversation, we ended up talking after, and he said he's never done an interview like that before, but he really enjoyed it because it was like alternate. Like, usually he doesn't, and I said it in the podcast, usually you don't find out much about the interviewer. So I had made a point of just sharing a wee bit about who I was, just so that, not because I think that he's interested, but just so that we had like a ground to stand on and connect with each other.
My favourite bit of the podcast is, or bits of the podcast are almost certainly like the 10 minutes before you start recording and like the 15 minutes after, because that's when everybody's actually got their gear done and you actually get, you know, as you say, maybe you know the interviewer a wee bit better and stuff like that.
Definitely.
I think that's what's missing in a lot of like British podcasts, is just what Matt just said. People don't let their guard down. People want to, they're worried about being cancelled, they're worried about this, they're worried about that. And we've got to talk about it, and we've got to talk about this, we've got to talk about that. And I mean, I have said some ridiculous things on mic. I mean, sometimes I've come away from some recordings.
Why do we not have like a compilation of that?
I mean, I've come away from other people's pod. I mean, there was one time in particular where KP gave me the strongest fucking coffee that I've ever had in my life at like 2:00 in the afternoon, and I blinked and it was 7:00 at night, and we've been sitting there for 4 hours, nearly 5 hours talking. And I came away and was on the train and just sat there and thought, I've got no idea what we spoke about there. I went into a total like flow state. and then started to think, and then started to worry, and then was like, wait a minute, just let it go. I was like thinking, text them and go, if there's anything in there. And I was just like, do you know what? I'm going to let this go. Because see, at the end of the day, I'm not that important. And and if anybody comes to me and goes, you were talking shite, I'll go, mate, I talk shite all the time.
Yeah,
like,
This is the thing about Rogan we were talking about, is that like he gets, is the common sort of figure that everybody relates to when you mention podcasts. So that's one of the things that maybe is both a positive and a negative for him. But the dude talks for like 30 hours a week, like every week of the year, 3 hours at a time, like sometimes 2 and 3 times a day. Like sooner or later, he's going to talk about shit. You know what I mean? Like, and then that tiny snippet that you're talking about gets blown up into this big, massive thing because of the following he's got. And you're like, that was like, whatever, 30 seconds, like 30 hours worth of content that guy produced that week. Like, sooner or later, he is going to talk about shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
And we all do, and it's your intention with it. If you're a good person and your intent, with most people that do podcasts, you can get a sense of their intent straight away. If they say something you don't agree with, you're not going to agree with everyone. You shouldn't change your full opinion on someone because you might not agree with one statement they say.
yeah.
Like,
This
don't
is
not like them
something
because
that's
of
present
that.
though, isn't it? It's this sort of all or nothing where it's like, I've found out that this person has got these 20 ideas that I love and connect with and agree with, but they've got this one that I don't, so I hate them.
Right.
Why is this happening? Why? I don't even understand it, and I do it myself. You know what I mean? I'm like, unfollow this person. They've said something that I don't like, and then sometimes I do the embarrassing thing and come back and refollow them again because I'm like, oh, I'm getting dragged into this.
never
sort
go
of,
back, man. Never go back.
I think sometimes you need to eat humble pie and go back, and if they were to
You
message
don't
and go,
ever
you
need to
unfollowed
eat
me and
humble pie
followed me,
on
I
Twitter.
could.
You're literally the only person on Twitter eating humble pie.
Aye, well,
We follow again.
that makes me better than him.
Yeah.
That's your achievement anxiety.
But it's okay to say you've done wrong as well. That's the coolest thing, to come out and say, actually, I unfollowed you because I didn't like that sentence, but actually I like the majority of stuff you do, because it makes us, like, working with young people, I've really become much more aware of the influences and role models we have, because what's making them think stuff is okay and not okay, in society. And if people are getting cancelled, the cancel culture is such a hot topic just now. For small things, it makes people feel like they can't even do anything with their life, because they're scared they're walking on eggshells. And coming back to why some people don't want to start podcasts is probably because of that. How will people in my normal life view me if they watch that? Because if you're in natural flow, like you say, you'll say things you maybe don't know what you're saying. And then maybe your mum listens to it, your friend listens to it, and they say, you said that, and you're like, I didn't mean it like that. Because it's all about intent, really. But people, it's a bit like art. Once you put it out there, people internalize it in any way they want. Wherever they're at in their mind, like Joni Mitchell said, like every single person that listened to one of her songs would take so many different emotions away from one song, because wherever they were at in their life, they would internalize it in a different way. So it's a bit like podcasts. Your intent kind of get muffled into what people are going through in their life when they're listening to it.
Yeah, it's got to go through their filter to make any sense to them.
That's it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we could probably sit here and talk all night, but I don't want
Probably.
you going back to Stirling you're living into. I don't want you going back to Stirling in rush hour, especially during COVID on a Friday afternoon. But listen, I mean, like I said, didn't touch one of the questions. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's been great actually meeting you in person.
I know.
Finally.
I know. Where can people find your podcast? I don't even think we've spoke about the name of your podcast. We spoke about it, but what's it called and where can they find it if they want
That's
to go
so
and
funny when you hear people ask you that. Because I'm not used to sharing it. It's just called Wee Stories with People. Where can you find it? Like Spotify, YouTube?
Where would you want people to? YouTube? Get the YouTube numbers up so you can monetize it.
Yeah, YouTube.
Have you got a Patreon or anything like that on the go?
No, I don't really
Buy
take
me a
it
coffee.
hugely seriously. I want to do more podcasts, but I think sometimes with work and therapy training, it's like taking over a bit. Hoping to do a wee bit more as things ease down, I think. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming through and being the
thank you for
first
having
guest
me.
in the new studio setup, I suppose.
Version, I was saying 1000.0 on like Instagram, because it feels like every time I come in, it's like an entirely different.